integers. Now you've done this in the past, but we're going to review through this and I'll go over the rules for adding integers, but we'll start this off looking at an application. Consider at 2 a.m. the temperature was -5 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon that same day it had increased 8 degrees. What was the temperature at noon? Now the word increased we know means to add. So what we're doing is we're going to add 8 degrees to -5 degrees. So I've drawn a number line out to help us with that. Here's -5 degrees right here. So we're going to go to -5 degrees and then we're going to add a +8. So I'm going to go back to the right 1 spot, 2 spots, 3 spots, 4 spots, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as you can see, I would get to 3. So the temperature would be 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And that should make sense because the negative and the positive have kind of a canceling effect and we end up with a +3. Now I have some other examples where we're adding a couple of integers together and we can use the number line and then I'm going to show you the rules, but some people like to see the number line approach first. So I'm going to put this one here, -1 plus -5. So below it here I'm going to go -1 and then a -5 means 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 more to the left, and as you can see, I get -6. Now, -7 plus 5, hopefully you can read through my scribbles here. I'm going to go to -7, which is way out here, and then I'm going to add a +5 to it. So coming back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gets me right here at -2. And last but not least, +6 plus -9. Now I put parentheses around the -9 so that you could see it wasn't a subtraction sign. Some people get that confused. So this is 6 plus -9, so I would start at 6. That would be over here to the right. But then I would come back, ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that gets me to -3. Now you don't want to have to draw a number line out every time you want to add a couple of integers together, especially if they're integers like 47 and -95 and 172, because the number line is going to get way too big. So if we use the following set of rules here, that'll make it a lot easier. To add integers, there's 3 cases. First case, if they have the same sign, like this example right here. And I'm using absolute value to help explain this. You add the absolute values, so you add these numbers up like they were positive, and then you use the common sign, your answer is negative. So if I add 1 and 5, I get 6, my answer is -6. Different signs. If I subtract, I know this is adding here, but it says to subtract because different signs, there's a canceling effect. I subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value, and then use the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. So let's look at this example right up here. This has an absolute value of 7. This has an absolute value of 5. I would subtract the 5 from the 7, which would give me 2. And then I would take the sign of the number that had the greater absolute value. And even though negative is smaller than positive, the absolute value here is bigger than the absolute value here. So it is a -2. I always think of it as when I'm adding one of each, I take the sign of the one that I have more of. That looks like I have more of. Do I have more negative than positive? Do I have more positive than negative? And then opposites. I don't have an example written out with opposites, but the sum of a number and its opposite is 0. Because this is just a special case of different signs. If they're opposites, that one's positive, one's negative. So you would subtract their absolute values, that would get you 0 right away. And that leads to an important property called the additive inverse property. The additive inverse property says that for any real number, and I just called it A, I used the variable A, that A plus the opposite of A plus the opposite of A, you're adding opposites, you get 0. That is also used in many books as a definition for opposites. Opposites are sometimes defined as 2 numbers whose sum is 0. Now we'll use these rules to work the following problems. And let me tell you, you've got to learn these rules and you've got to practice them and get them in your memory so that you can add positive and negative numbers together as easily as you add just positive numbers, one to another. So let's try these examples here. The very first one, you're adding a -8 and a +3. So the signs are different. You take the smaller absolute value away from the larger absolute value, so 8 minus 3 is 5, and you have a negative number with the greater absolute value, so your answer is -5. Sometimes if you think of it as money, you owe $8, you have $3. You pay the $3 that you have, and now you only owe $5. Sometimes money makes it easier because people are used to working with money. -4 plus -11. Now here I'm adding two numbers that have the same sign. They're both negatives. So I add their absolute values. 4 and 11 is 15, and I keep the sign. I use the same sign, so it is -15. Again, think of it as money. You owe $4, you owe $11, and you're going to combine those. You're going to add those. Well, you owe 4, you owe 11, you owe 15 all together. Now this is another example where you have one of each. One's negative, one's positive. And in this case, I'm going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. So it's going to be 41 minus 26, which is 15. Now that's not my answer because I have to make sure by sign the number that I subtracted from had the greater absolute value was negative, so this is a -15. Go back to money. You owe $41, you have $26, you pay it off, you now only owe $15. Now the third one, you're adding three numbers together. One's positive and two are negative. You may already know that you don't have to necessarily follow the order of operations where you're add straight from left to right because they're all addition. Some of you already know about the associative property of addition, but that's the way I'm going to work this one out. I'm going to go from left to right. I'm going to add a positive 52 and a -30. So I subtract the absolute value of this from the absolute value of this. That would be 22, and I have more positive than negative. This is the greater absolute value, so this is 22 plus -42. Now I have one of each again. So I subtract the one with the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. 42 minus 22 is 20, and this has the greater absolute value, so it's -20, and that's my answer. Now I'm going to apply some algebra in the mix here. I'm going to evaluate some expressions. We've done this before. I'm going to substitute in. -16 goes in here. I get -16 plus -7. Same sign. You add their absolute values, keep the sign. It's -23. Here I have 42 plus -16. I put the parentheses not to confuse you with a subtraction sign. One of each. Subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. 42 minus 16 is 26, and I have the absolute value of the larger one is the positive, so it's a positive 26. Again, you have $42, you owe 16, you pay off what you have, and you're still left with $26 left over. Positive. So in this case, I'm adding three numbers again here. This would be plus -5 and then plus 20. And again, I'm going to go from left to right. I'm going to combine these two. Well, they're both negatives. When you combine two negatives, you add their absolute values. That would be 16 and 5, 21, and use the sign. This is -21. And then you're going to add that to the 20, one of each. Subtract the one with the smaller absolute value from the absolute value of the larger looking one here, and I have 21 minus 20, which is 1, and this is the larger absolute value here, the negative, so it's going to be -1. And last but not least, substitute the -5 in, plus -20. They have the same sign, they're both negative. You add their absolute values, 5 and 20 is 25, and use the sign -25. You really got to hit this hard and make sure that you are practicing this type of problem. And if you haven't taken notes on this, you go back, you watch the video again, you take notes, especially on the rules and the examples that are given thereafter. And as always, practice, practice, practice.